commercial that comes booming in for mesothelioma. I still don't know what that is, by the way. Like half the commercials on cable TV are about mesothelioma, and I still don't know what that is. But it's just like screaming in my ears. So that's still probably a little bit of a problem. Ohio Dog says Connor could be getting some of the NIL money for a cameo. Yeah, there you go. You don't turn down any NIL money. I can promise you that. All right, so let's get ready to go here. By the way, good to see Mark Morris checking in live, just saying that Bama fans can't seem to get over that whooping we put on them. Let's order them some crying towels. Yeah, I was on with our buddy Ryan Fowler in Tuscaloosa on the radio yesterday. We were kind of talking about this. I don't get the sense that like Georgia fans and Alabama fans arguing with each other is going to go out of style anytime soon. I sort of feel like this is kind of here to stay there for a while, and I don't know. I kind of enjoy it. I'm kind of. I think it's been fun to watch them backed into a corner on the fact they lost to Georgia. I think it's been kind of enjoyable, and we'll contribute to some of that. We've talked about that some yesterday about the fallacies that Alabama fans have convinced them of on the basis of the Jamison Williams injury. We said yesterday, listen, when your best players are small, you are more prone to injury. That's not what Alabama used to be. Think about the 2015 team led by Derrick Henry at running back. He's like the superhero figure. That's what Alabama used to be. Don't even go back to like the Kirby Smart era when you had those big guys on defense all across the board. By comparison, the current version of Alabama looks a little bit more like Nick Saban. It's shorter, it's smaller, it's more frail, and those are players that are just more prone to injury. It's not a coincidence, I don't believe, even though the injuries were quite different. Jamison Williams got hurt in this year's national championship game. Devontae Smith got hurt in the previous year's national championship game. When your best players are little, your best players are going to be more prone to get hurt. All kinds of injuries. It'll be finger injury, knee injury, whatever else. That's just kind of a thing that you're going to have to run the risk of. Bigger athletes are just less prone to injury in a sport like football where everyone is violently colliding on every single play. So trade physicality for finesse at your own peril, potentially. But anyway, that's probably a different topic for a different day. Matt Rukavina. Is there nothing that Matt Rukavina doesn't know? So mesothelioma is a lung cancer caused by exposure to asbestos. So sounds pretty serious for sure. All right, last one. We'll get ready to get started. He says, Brad Hotnett says, if you are on Twitter, check out Marcus Howard's feed. He's doing training with kids and gives shout-outs to a bunch of them. That's awesome to hear. Big fan of Marcus Howard, of course, and glad to hear. I love these guys that get into training, especially, and I know Terrence Edwards does a lot of this too. Like, I like guys who train kids because, man, kids need good training. Like, they need good expert training to be better at sports. And listen, there are a lot of people who going to say they provide that, but do they really, kind of provide them? I'm talking about across all sports. So, like, when these really good former football players are not just training like 5-star or whatever on his way to, Big State U, but also training like 9, 10, 11-year-olds, I really, really like that because, even for guys who are not going to a college career, they just want to play in high school to get the kind of training they need just to be able to do that. I'm always happy when a lot of these former players kind of get involved in stuff like that. All right, so we are on Facebook, YouTube, Twitter, Twitch. Hello to all of our video platforms. Good to see all of you today. We talked to Arch Manning a little bit on the show the last few days. There is a new update on Manning. There's at least one aspect of his recent comments that I think are important. I'll tell you about that on the show. There's a lot of news. A bunch of it related to like SEC stuff and like potential change of the NCAA, battle lines kind of being drawn over the NIL stuff. At a certain point today, we're just going to kind of get into a rhythm. We're kind of like rattling off boom, 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 one fairly substantial news story after another. We won't spend too much time on any of it, but I don't want the show to pass without making you aware of all of it. Also, cool stuff out there with a great tandem of former Georgia running backs in the news for different reasons. We'll talk about that. One very funny golden shoe, one that's just kind of a nice reminder of the great time we're in right now. So we'll do all of that. But off the top, ESPN asks a provocative question about Georgia. It's a question that deserves an answer. It's going to take us a few days to fully answer it, but I want to start it today. Emerging stars in the Georgia defense? Yeah, we think we see some. We'll tell you about them right now. It is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented by Engineered Solutions of Georgia, and it begins right now.
Today's episode of DawgNation Daily is brought to you by Engineered Solutions of Georgia. Dial 678-ESOG now for a solution to your foundation and waterproofing problems.
Presented by DawgNation.com. This is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans. Here's your host, Brandon Adams.
I'm a big baseball fan, and there's a phrase in baseball that I really like, and I think in this particular case, it's also relevant for those of us who care about college football, Georgia football in particular. The phrase goes like this, that when a player gets off to a slow start, and gosh knows the Atlanta Braves currently have a few of those, but when a player gets off to a slow start, one of the things that people say to comfort themselves about star player and a slow start is just look at the back of the baseball card. In other words, you flip over the back of the baseball card, you see those stat lines compiled over the course of years, and that's a pretty good idea of who this is as a player. And some really slow start to a new season isn't likely to last. Eventually, the back of the baseball card is just going to tell the story. Now, I've always loved a baseball card, so the idea of holding a baseball card and looking at the stat lines in the back of it, that kind of just makes me feel warm all the way around. But I do believe that's a pretty good philosophy, that in any given moment, you can have reason to worry or reason to be anxious about something related to sports, but track records do matter. Track records should give you comfort, and track records are the thing that you want to lean on to make better predictions about the future. What's the future going to look like in Major League Baseball or college football or whatever other sport you care about? The past, especially the recent past, probably provides you a pretty good hint on all of that. Now, why do I say this? Because ESPN recently wrote kind of a post-spring analysis of Georgia, a couple of different writers pairing up to do this. And at one point in time, the ESPN folks asked what I think is a pretty provocative question. Now, this isn't hating on Georgia or anything like that. This is a question worth answering. It's not a rhetorical question, in other words. It's the kind of thing that those of us who care about UGA, someone like me who does a show dedicated to this topic, someone like you who has made following Georgia football one of your biggest pastimes, if we really want to have the best vision of how the 2022 season is going to unfold, then figuring out and answer the question that ESPN recently asked in a write-up about Georgia is probably something that we ought to spend some time on. And, in fact, it's going to take us more than one day to answer this. This is one of those deals where I want to introduce the topic today. I want to give you one piece, I believe, of the answer on this, and I want to visit again tomorrow and probably on Wednesday there as well. And really kind of get into this here a little bit and give it the full attention that it's worth. So let me show you recently what ESPN wrote about Georgia. By the way, the other day on DawgNation.com, Connor Riley had a great story on this very topic there as well. But this is the tandem of writers. Is it Alex Scarborough is one of these? And then Chris Lowe, two good writers, two guys know the SEC very well. So they get involved on this. And here it is. Who are the emerging stars on this next Georgia defense? The question is asked. There are plenty of candidates, ESPN says, and it helps to have a player as talented as defensive tackle Jalen Carter returning. But there are gaps to fill for the defending national champs on defense, which should make for a competitive preseason camp. Now, at face value, I don't think any of that is really all that easy to disagree with. Pretty clearly, Jalen Carter looks to be a sure thing, one of the best players in college football, probably I would say the best player on the Georgia roster. But it's also true around him there are gaps to fill because you had 5 players taken in the first round of the most recent NFL draft. Those were obviously key contributors for your national championship team. Now they are gone. So how are those spots going to be filled? And will there be, and I love the phrase that the ESPN writers Lowe and Scarborough use here, will there be emerging stars to take their place? Now, it is probably not a surprise to you to find out that, yes, I do believe there are likely to be emerging stars on this Georgia defense. And as I said before, the reason why I feel comfortable with that, and you can take the quote now if you want to, the reason why I feel comfortable saying that is because of the back of the baseball card, because of the track record that Georgia has in terms of producing emerging stars on defense. That track record leads me to believe that Georgia's still likely to be fine on defense this season. And we may not have been introduced yet, and you can take that down if you want to, we may not be introduced yet to the players who, or especially the country outside the bubble of DawgNation especially, may not be introduced yet to the players who are going to be the new stars in the Georgia defense. But history suggests they probably do exist. History suggests they are probably on their way. And let me kind of look at one position today, and then we'll look at a couple of different position groups over the course of the next couple of days. So ESPN says, who are the emerging stars on the Georgia defense? Fair question, worth answering. Here's my answer to this today. Let's start with linebacker. And in particular, I want to start with inside linebacker because as we've told you before, if you look at the two best single-season performances in Kirby Smart history at Georgia, he's been coach here since 2016. His best two teams, the most recent team that won the national championship, the 2017 team that also made the college football playoff, they had at least one thing pretty important in common. They had great play from inside linebackers. You had a Butkus Award-winning inside linebacker in the national championship team, Nakobe Dean, key catalyst to the success the Bulldogs enjoyed. And in 2017, you had the same kind of season from a guy in Roquan Smith, who in the NFL draft was actually drafted much higher than Nakobe was, but the impact here at UGA was very similar. Roquan Smith, as a Butkus Award guy in 2017, helped propel that Georgia defense there as well. So if you are looking for emerging stars on the Georgia defense, the inside linebacker spot is a pretty good place to look. Now, I can't guarantee any of this, but once again, the back of the baseball card, the recent track record for success would suggest that inside linebacker is a pretty good place to look for emerging stars in the Georgia defense. With that in mind, let me look at the guy here who coaches that position, Glenn Schumann, who clearly is one of the rising stars in the coaching ranks on this Georgia staff. He's now co-defensive coordinator here, and we're not quite so sure yet how much responsibility that gives him over the Georgia defense, but we presume a lot. Even before becoming, more involved in the defensive decision-making for the Dogs, Schumann was already an impact coach. In fact, he's got reason to brag, a reason to take a bow after the most recent NFL draft because of all the success that he helped produce for the Dogs and the Georgia players in that category. And recently on social media, kind of did some version of that. I thought this was a great picture that Schumann shared. So you got the Monty Rice. This is back when they all played in the same team together. The Monty Rice jersey, the Tay Crowder jersey, the Quay Walker jersey, and the Kobe Dean jersey, all those lockers side by side together. All of these are guys who eventually became NFL draft picks. Now, what's amazing is that picture doesn't even have room for all the players that were drafted off that same team. You got four of them there, but there's obviously you could have had Channing Tindall right there as well. I don't know if you just couldn't squeeze that into the photo, but that's four guys: Rice, Crowder, Walker, and Dean, all once having played together at Georgia, all guys who became NFL draft picks. It gives you an idea of how successful Georgia has been there. But let me give you a little bit more on this, why a guy like Schumann can feel so proud showing a picture like that. When you look at the overall track record of success that Georgia has had among linebackers in this NFL draft, what you realize is that 2021 may be the best example of this, but in actuality, it was just the latest example of something that's been going on for quite some time. Let me give you a little bit of a timeline here on this. If you want to start in the 2018 draft, when Roquan Smith got taken in the first round there by the Chicago Bears, you see a big run of Georgia linebackers taken in the draft year after year after that. In fact, let me show you this here for a moment on the screen because I want to make sure I give all these guys their credit. So Roquan Smith was a first-round pick in 2018. Tay Crowder became a seventh-round pick in 2020. There's a little bit of an unsung type guy, but clearly played like an NFL linebacker for Glenn Schumann and the Georgia Bulldogs. Monty Rice was the third-round pick in the 2021 draft. Then this most recent draft had Quay Walker going in the first round, Channing Tindall going in the third round, and Kobe Dean going in the third round there as well. A lot of folks thought Dean should have been drafted higher, but still, he put a great career together at Georgia. So if you want to look in just the last, handful of drafts, that's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 linebackers drafted that played under Glenn Schumann there at Georgia. So the point here is the recent track record at UGA suggests there is likely to be an emerging star from this linebacker group at Georgia for 2022. Now, I wouldn't stake my reputation on any one guy being that dude, but I'm going to look at a list of 6 players drafted since 2018 and assume that track record means something for the upcoming year. Now, I think there are a couple of obvious names you might gravitate towards. One of the guys we saw a lot this spring, another one of these guys we won't see again until the summer. But between these two guys, other names are going to be there. I think you start to feel a little bit comfortable that, yeah, maybe emerging star here on this defense, maybe that's on his way. I mean, I think pretty clearly one of the most buzzed about players for Georgia this spring was JDJ Johnson, a guy that was praised by Kirby Smart for his leadership, a guy who those who've been able to watch practices or see scrimmages, boosters, things like that, have whispered, oh, boy, he's making plays. Oh, boy, he's doing some things. That he just sort of has that feel of a linebacker out of the same mold of the Georgia linebackers that I mentioned a moment ago. And obviously, you don't want to put too much on him. And, someone like me with all these lights and cameras and microphones saying this kind of stuff out loud sort of feels like hype that hasn't been justified as of yet. Totally get that. But what I'm actually leaning on is the guy who occupies the same spot on the field that guys like Nakobe Dean and Roquan Smith once occupied, that guy eventually resembling players like that is probably kind of a safer bet than not. And if you don't believe my words on this, believe Kendall Milton here for a moment, who's done battle with him plenty during Georgia spring practice. And yeah, he sees the same kind of potential in a guy like JDJ, or as they call him, Pop. He sees that same kind of potential that previous Georgia linebackers have shown on the field. This was Kendall Milton from earlier this summer.
I think Pop is going to be special. I see a lot of resemblances with Quay in his game. When you go out there, run routes against him, we do the drills where we have to kind of juke him out. He's just patient. He just lets everything come to him. He's smart with the game, and he's a super physical player. And I feel like those are all tools that kind of make a good linebacker in the long run. And I feel like Pop, he's going to be another one of those guys that steps up on the defense and becomes a leader on the team.
I mean, I think that Kendall Milton's kind of hard to argue with right there. He's clearly put some thought into his answer. You can tell by the way that he says it. And he's kind of leaning on, as I said before, the track record of what Georgia has been at linebacker to make some educated assumptions about what it will be for this upcoming season. And then beyond that, I could talk about, maybe Xavier Sorey. I could talk about, Jalen Walker. I could talk about Tresman Marshall maybe trying to come back from injury. I could talk about a lot of those guys. But I also want to identify a guy that I don't want you to forget about here, because we didn't see him this spring, but we will see him presumably this summer, and probably see him a lot, coming up this fall there as well. Think about a guy like Smile Mondon, who's kind of coming back from his own, injury situation right now. But that's a guy going back to the time in which he was a recruit who's been laser focused on also living into the reputation that Georgia linebackers have earned playing for Glenn Schumann over the course of years. In fact, let me go back to an interview that Jeff Sentell did with Mondon while he was still a recruit about what Georgia fans would see of him when they finally got a chance to see him play. Now, we've seen him play some. I believe we'll see him play more this upcoming season, but it's a reminder of the kind of young, up-and-coming type talents that Georgia has at the linebacker position. This was Mondon as a recruit.
Somebody watches you play. What do you hope they pick up about what's important to you and what you work on to be great?
That I watch film, because the game, I feel like it comes natural to me because of how much film I watch. So I feel like I know what's gonna happen before it happens. So I just have I'm a step ahead, I feel like.
So listen, that's a guy saying, hey, I could brag about my athleticism, I could brag about whatever else, but I'm actually going to brag about my own dedication to learning the game, studying the game, being the best player I can be because of how connected I get to the game, not just relying on my own athleticism. And listen, I play a clip of Mondon, I play a clip of Milton talking about JDJ Johnson, but as I said before, those aren't necessarily the guys, the two guys who are going to be it. They're just two guys who could be it. Your guy may be Jalen Walker. Your guy may be Tresman Marshall. Your guy may be Xavier Sorey. Your guy may be somebody else here. The point of this topic is not to say here is the one guy that's obviously going to be, because no one's going to be that accurate in making any kind of prediction about an individual player. But when you look at a long list of linebackers drafted for Glenn Schumann going back to 2018, when you look at that long list, the presumption is there are NFL players on this linebacking core for this upcoming season. They all have the potential of being an emerging breakout star. ESPN rightly says, well, who are these guys? What are their names? My prediction is at least one of them will introduce himself in a very big way as soon as the season begins. My name's Brandon Adams, and this is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented today by Engineered Solutions of Georgia. And We do that there off the top a little bit today with the linebackers. I want to look at defensive backs one day this week, and then another position group in kind of a different way before we're done there as well. So ESPN asked for emerging stars. We think that's a question worth answering. We'll take a couple days to do that here on the program over the course of the next couple of days. By the way, for those of you tuning in on video, thanks for being here. 9:45, DawgNation.com, DawgNation app. That's our 1st and 15. 10 a.m. after that, Facebook, YouTube, Twitter, Twitch. Glad to have you there on video with us as well. Also podcast form, the Apple Player, Spotify, worldfamousdawgnation.com. We really appreciate you being with us. And, of course, radio at noon on Athens Sports Radio 960 The Ref as well. Man, a lot of ways for you to connect with the program. The fact that you show up and you do that with us each and every day, that is not something we take for granted. We are truly appreciative of that, and we mean that sincerely. By the way, also very appreciative and thankful for our friends at Engineered Solutions of Georgia today there as well. Not just for their long-term support of us, although they've been friends of ours for a long time, and not just because they are proud partners of UGA. Always fun to support those that support the Dogs. Those aren't the only reasons, though, we're thankful of Engineered Solutions of Georgia. We're also thankful for ESOG because they step up and help homeowners when they're facing what could be very serious problems. After all, you hear me say Engineered Solutions of Georgia. They have the word solution in their name. What that means is they understand the value of solving big problems for homeowners. And two of the biggest problems you can face, if you have some sort of waterproofing issue, when it rains, you see water where it's not supposed to be. For instance, maybe in your garage, or your crawl space, down in your basement, for sure on that. And if you've got that, you know you need to do something about it because you give water enough time, it can make the Grand Canyon. Imagine what it can do to your home if you don't get it seen about, if you don't get it checked, if you don't get it fixed, that problem taken care of. That's what Engineered Solutions of Georgia stands ready to do for you. Also, those foundation issues. You look at your walls. You see those cracks. No, that's probably not good. And it's probably not. But it is also maybe not the world's biggest issue there either. But I can't tell you. Engineered Solutions of Georgia, they can, though. They've got 2 full-time engineers on staff. Smart people who know how to solve your problem. So reach out to them. They are very easy to get in touch with. The phone number could not be easier to remember. Simply dial 678-ESOG now. That's 678-ESOG now. And that'll get you in touch with Engineered Solutions of Georgia. Can't wait for that. They're going to take good care of you here this spring and this summer for sure. All right. We're going to try to take good care of you in a moment ourselves. We'll talk to Connor Riley. Kroger Fresh Day coming up with him. A lot to get into with Connor. Some of it recruiting related, some of it on-field related. We'll keep the conversation going because I know Connor had some interesting thoughts on this at DawgNation.com the other day about the need to kind of replace 5 first-round picks off the Georgia defense for the upcoming season. So we'll do some of that with him coming up in just a moment. Before that, though, I want to go around the doghouse. And Arch Manning has shown up in media a little bit over the course of the last 24 hours. He is beginning spring practice there for his senior season at Isidore Newman. That's the high school that he attends in New Orleans. And so there have been a couple of stories about Arch in the national media the last couple of last 24 hours. A couple of stories from a couple different websites, but it's all happened within the last day. And a lot of this for me is the kind of typical recruiting stuff where, hey, he says some good things about Texas, says some good things about Georgia, says some good things about Alabama. There's even a little bit of the LSU, Florida stuff that seems to linger there, although for now, no one really seems to think they're all that big a part of all of this. He may take an unofficial visit to Florida at some point in time. But as of now, there's seemingly not a lot going on there. It's been kind of that sort of that Georgia, Texas, Alabama. And I told you a couple times last week, I believe Manning's coming to Georgia. It's a collection of circumstantial evidence that leads me to say why that is. We've told you that we think that right now Alabama seems to be making a lot of inroads in recruiting with Eli Holstein, another good quarterback out of the state of Louisiana, ironically enough. But the pursuit of Holstein would seem to suggest that Alabama knows it's not getting Arch Manning, which kind of leaves you Georgia, Texas. What we've said here before is that's a school that just produced 15 draft picks compared to a school that produces 0. That's a guy, Arch Manning, who's probably about as drama-free in his recruitment as any recent big name has been. Texas is a drama farm. There's a soap opera taking place there virtually every single day. Coaches calling out players, players calling out other players. That's happened this offseason alone. Things like that just seem to be happening there a lot. By comparison, Georgia is just pretty buttoned up, pretty business as usual. I think that's a cultural fit for Manning. My prediction is that Manning's going to Georgia, but clearly this has to still play out. My words here are just a prediction. They're not a news report. That's not the business I'm really in necessarily. So when Manning says the things that he says in the news, it's going to be interesting to us. However, for the most part, what he says about the other schools, I kind of take this as pretty similar to the things that recruits typically say about all their finalists. The recruits just kind of like the idea of everybody staying in the race until the very end. And Manning, I think, in the words that I read the story at on3.com, our buddy Sam Spiegelman wrote that, Manning for the most part kind of does that. There was, however, one thing from Manning in the story from Sam Spiegelman at On3 that I thought was a little bit interesting because it was a little bit different than I expected Manning to say. I've been kind of operating on the belief that Manning is heading towards probably an early summer commitment, but maybe, according to what Spiegelman wrote there at On3 with Manning, that might not necessarily be the case. This is what Arch Manning told Sam Spiegelman at On3 about his recruiting timeline. I think you can read this for free online, I think. He says, it's kind of getting closer. He means his commitment decision. I don't really have a point yet, though. But I guess it's narrowing stuff down. I'm looking forward to making a decision either before the season or during the season or after the season. If I was ready, I'd probably commit right now, but I'm not, so I'm just waiting. Once again, that quote from Manning to Sam Spiegelman from On3. There was another national story about Manning where he talked about wanting to see more of Texas and really all the teams that he's considering, but pretty clearly here, Texas is the team that was kind of been the worst on the field, and so before you go there, maybe you want to see, can this team really be any better than they were a year ago in year two under Steve Sarkisian? So the timeline on all of this I find to be kind of interesting. Now, based on the quote that I read you right there, I don't think Manning is clearly committing to anything in terms of when he might make the announcement. But the fact that he's holding out the possibility that he could take this into the season or even, before the start of the early signing period there late in December, I find that to kind of be pretty interesting. So of the things that we've learned about Manning over the course of the last day or so, the same group of finalists are what we always thought they were, but the fact that he's willing to go a little longer towards making his decision, I don't know. I kind of found that to be somewhat interesting and maybe worth your attention here as you're following how it's all going down with Arch Manning. Before I bring on Connor Riley here today, I also want to remind you of this. We've got a couple of big-time opportunities to be out in the public here coming up really soon, which I'm really excited about. I told you yesterday that Monday we're going to be at the Pella Window Indoor Showroom in Duluth, which I'm really excited about. That's going to be a lot of fun. But also we've got another big event coming up that we are very excited to be a part of. I want to make sure you're aware of this, that we're partnering with the Pollock Family Foundation. You know David Pollock, of course. We're partnering with the Pollock Family Foundation for the great golf charity event they've got coming up. Now, what the Pollock Family Foundation does is it focuses on childhood obesity and obviously educating parents about how to have better nutrition for your kids and more active lifestyles just to make kind of a healthier standard for your family. That's one of the things that's very important to David, always has been, and that's kind of one of the things that his Pollock Family Foundation serves. They're also partnering with Children's Healthcare of Atlanta for the last 6 years on a golf tournament. This is a really fun event. I'm very excited about being there and really proud of the work that David and his foundation are doing, along with Children's Healthcare of Atlanta, supporting the Strong for Life program, which helps fight childhood obesity. You know how serious this is. It's kind of a growing problem in our society all around. We all want to make better health choices, but certainly helping kids to make better health choices is a really important thing, and that's one of the things that David's dedicated his life towards. So coming up on Monday, May 23rd, we're actually going to be with David and the Pollock Family Foundation in support of Children's Healthcare of Atlanta for the great golf tournament. This is a really, really fun thing, and we're just really proud of it. We're proud to be there. It's going to be fun, but it's also going to be for a great cause there as well. And if you'd like to help out, you want to make a donation, if you want to learn more about this, go to the website. It's pollockfamilyfoundation.com. Let me give that to you again. pollockfamilyfoundation.com. You can get more information about what they do, about the big event coming up, and you can learn how you can help out. Be a part of the solution here by making a donation. Go to pollockfamilyfoundation.com for a lot more on that. And we will, if you're going to be there, we'll see you at the big golf outing there coming up on Monday, May 23rd. Really excited about all of that. All right, before we're done, there is a bunch of news around the SEC and a bunch of news around college football. This feels like a very bigger word than I should use, but tumultuous offseason for the sport. Some of this stuff feels more real than the typical offseason banter would usually lend yourself to believe. So we'll address a lot of that. There's also some fun stuff involving a couple of former Dogs now in the NFL. We'll do that with you. But for everything related to UGA, including the latest in Arch Manning and everything else, let's do a Kroger Fresh Take with Connor Riley right now.
From Athens and across the SEC or wherever the recruiting trail may lead, here's a DawgNation.com insider.
So we'll say hello to Connor Riley here, Kroger Fresh Take with him. A lot to get into. I want to pick up on the Manning conversation, though, before we move on. I guess, Connor, let me start with my prediction. I made this, I think, pretty clearly the last few days here. I do believe that Arch Manning is going to Georgia. Nothing from the published reports involving him yesterday really changes my mind about that. Recruits say what they say. For the most part, they say good things about every school that's kind of in the race for their services, if nothing else, for no other reason than just simply being polite. But through process of elimination, I think you sort of see Georgia as the last man standing here. Alabama going after Eli Holstein. Florida, LSU not really getting involved here in any significant way. Ole Miss never really getting involved, certainly not as much as I thought they probably would at one point in time. It's kind of down to Georgia and Texas, and I think a smart person, given the choice between the two, ain't taking Texas right now, bad grammar intentional. So my prediction is that Manning's going to Georgia. Let me let you respond to that, and then we'll talk about some of the stuff that's out there over the course of the last 24 hours.
Yeah, so I'm not quite sure I'm ready to join you just yet on the Manning is going to Georgia train. I will note, and you're obviously going to touch on this a little bit later in your show, Dylan Raiola, the number one quarterback in the 2024 recruiting rankings, he commits to Ohio State last night. It had kind of been trending that way. And when you look at some of the other guys that Georgia has targeted in this recruiting cycle, they're now in an Arch Manning or bust cycle. And I think not just for this 2023 recruiting cycle, but for the 2024 one as well. And obviously they have more time to make up things in the 2024, and guys can obviously emerge between now and the 2024 national signing period. But they have so clearly staked themselves in this Arch Manning sweepstakes to, this is going to be a thing where if they miss, which I still think is a possibility, and I think even you would likely admit that there as well, while you do think that Georgia is going to get Manning, you could see a world where he ends up going to Texas for whatever misguided reason that might ultimately be. I think we're both in agreement on that. If you miss on him, the quarterback position becomes somehow even more interesting than it has been at Georgia for the past however many years that Kirby Smart has been there, because you're really 3-4 years out and you're looking at your quarterback future plan. Now, Stetson Bennett has shown that all can get blown to bits and your best laid plans never end up coming to fruition. But I think when it comes to Arch Manning and where things stand with him right now, and the Dylan Raiola domino falling, so to speak, yesterday, it's now very clearly Georgia has put all of their eggs in this Arch Manning basket, and they'll find a talented quarterback out there, whether it be the portal years from now or even in this 2023 recruiting class. But with what we've seen from Arch, with Alabama sort of, I think, like you've pointed out, taking themselves out of it, it's Georgia and Texas for Arch Manning. And if Georgia doesn't get Arch Manning, I'm going to be really interested to sort of see where that leaves Georgia in terms of its quarterback recruiting.
So I agree with the premise that you're establishing there. I agree with your reasoning. However, I guess I don't really view the Raiola story as a story very connected to UGA, because it seems like had he not gone to Ohio State, and there had been a lot of predictions to Ohio State for a while, it seems like that next team there was USC. I mean, clearly Georgia fans wanted Dylan Raiola because you'd always want the best quarterback in any given cycle. So Raiola was popular with UGA fans, but unless you know more than I do, I don't see all that much evidence that UGA was all that popular with Raiola. So him choosing Ohio State, I don't think that's kind of like an example of, well, I guess Georgia's got all of its eggs in Arch Manning now, even though I kind of agree with where you're coming from on that. I don't know that Georgia was making all that many inroads with Raiola. Am I getting that wrong by saying it that way?
I don't know. I sort of judge these kind of things by how often is Jeff Sentell writing about these guys. I think Jeff does a very good job of laying the breadcrumbs, so to speak, of who guys Georgia's really in on and who they aren't. And he had written about Dylan Raiola a couple of times here. Now, he had, I think, been trending away from Georgia for a good bit. And I think that's because in my understanding and the reading of the green in this, and I could certainly be wrong here, I think Georgia decided they would rather pursue and go after the Arch Manning bird in the basket. So then waiting out this Dylan Raiola, because you do point out, Ohio State wanted him, USC wanted him. There's a lot more variables that were in play when it came to Raiola. Whereas with Manning, 2-3 months ago, I think we all sort of figured Texas, Alabama, Georgia, those were the sort of three big teams. And now it looks like Alabama is taking themselves out of that race. And so really, if you're Georgia, you're really competing with two teams. And quite frankly, Georgia should beat out Texas at this point in the stage for a recruit like Arch Manning, given the success that Texas has had in recent years and the success that Georgia has had.
Do you take seriously the possibility that Arch Manning could still be uncommitted in August?
I do, because for a guy who doesn't do a lot of media, granted, him doing media with our friend Sam Spiegelman the other day, good on Sam for getting that. We know a lot about Arch Manning for a guy who doesn't, talk a whole lot, doesn't have social media, isn't, throwing things out there. I could definitely see a world where, and because this has been an unconventional recruitment from almost the beginning, him taking this maybe even somehow all the way up to signing day, as he mentioned there in the quote a few minutes ago, after the season. I do think it'll be interesting to see how the visits go, and specifically if he takes official visits to Georgia and to Texas during the month of June. Now, obviously, the Mannings have money, and the difference between an official and an unofficial visit isn't all that germane to the Manning family there. So I do think that, I could see it, but I've always sort of been under the belief it's going to take his visits in June. Whether it gets to Florida or LSU, I think those are largely inconsequential. And I think my target timeline had always sort of been July. I think that's when he wanted to make his decision and decide what he was ultimately going to do. Because
you mentioned Jeff Santel a moment ago, I'm always reminded of what Manning's high school coach told Jeff about Arch, about him wanting kind of like a 1970s style recruitment. Now, you can insert your own joke about that, of course, but I take that to mean, hey, he wants as drama-free a process as possible. Not committing before the season starts and taking it to December, that's not what that would be. A name as big as Manning, who's going to bring a lot of mainstream fans into the recruiting process, a guy like that making his announcement in December, that's ratcheting up the drama. That's not turning down the drama. And so to hear Arch acknowledge within the last 24 hours of, yeah, maybe I might take it all the way to December, that to me is a little bit of an interesting admission. Now, he also leaves the door open to, make a decision at any point in time. He'd make a decision right now, he says, if he wanted to. But the idea that he's even considering playing as an uncommitted prospect in his senior season of high school, taking it down the wire with these teams that he's considering, that to me was an interesting admission, because that, I have to say, is not what I expected to happen. I expected an early summer announcement from Manning and, getting to work on, going to play his senior year, whatever else he wanted to do. But the idea that Manning could play this fall without committing yet, to me, that ratchets up the drama. That doesn't turn it down, and we've been kind of led to believe that's the opposite of what Arch would, I guess, prefer to do, or certainly those close around him would prefer him to.
Right, because, you and I, we follow the recruiting game. We sort of know the ins and outs here. If Arch Manning really didn't want any drama, any attention, he'd be committed and he wouldn't be visiting anywhere else. I think when you leave those breadcrumbs out there of, hey, I'm still taking visits to other schools, hey, I'm still undecided, the longer this sort of gets drawn out, the more attention is obviously going to build around Arch Manning. Now, a lot of that's going to be baked in by the fact that he's the number one quarterback in the country, that he's the nephew of Peyton and Eli Manning, obviously the ties that the Manning family has, not just to the SEC, but Southern football as a whole. That family is royalty. The longer this drags out, the more and more that starts to run counter to what they have said about drama-free, low profile, because you and I have talked about this before. There's always going to be an appetite for Arch Manning updates, news, so to speak. And when there is nothing concrete in there, something is going to fill that vacuum. And the greater time period that you give this year with Arch Manning and his recruitment, the larger that vacuum is going to get, and the more you're going to have people throwing stuff up against a wall to try and satisfy that Arch Manning hunger.
I think that's right. I want to talk to you about something else I know you've written about, and I talked about off the top of the program, the idea of there being, quote, emerging stars in the Georgia defense. ESPN, I think, fairly asked, well, who are they? Connor, I don't know that I'd stake my reputation on any individual name, but I will be shocked if Georgia's defense isn't just about as good as Georgia's defense always is when it plays here coming up in the fall of 2022. Now, having 5 first-round picks and being as good as it was last season, that's a long, certainly, bridge to try to cross here on this. But the idea that the drop-off is going to be significant for the Dogs on defense, there are a lot of non-Georgia fans who I believe wish that would be true, but I don't think they're going to get their wish on this. I talked about linebackers off the top here a moment ago. There's a pretty well-established track record of Georgia linebackers going to the NFL. So when I look at JDJ, or they call him Pop, Jamon Dumas Johnson, when I look at Smile Mana, when I consider Jalen Walker, when I consider Tresman Marshall, when I consider guys like this, a couple of those guys are going to play in the NFL. I mean, that's just what the Georgia track record suggests. So I think we'll be introduced to the names of the breakout stars for Georgia over the course of the season, but I'm fairly confident they are there. You obviously cover this from a little bit more of an objective slant. What do you think about that notion?
Yeah, I think by the end of the season, is the Georgia defense as dominant was a year ago? We'll see. But I think, that first month of the season, there's going to be a lot up for grabs. And I know you touched on it earlier, Jamon Dumas Johnson, one of the big winners of spring, and the way he came out and played and performed. We know, I feel like we can cross Nolan Smith, Jalen Carter, and Keely Ringo off that emerging, because we know who those guys are. I think most college football fans can tell you who Jalen Carter are and who Keely Ringo are, and I think SEC fans will tell you who Nolan Smith is. It's that wave of, I would include Dumas Johnson in there, though, but by the time Georgia beats South Carolina in week 3, and I think rather comfortably when they do that, we're going to know who Jamon Dumas Johnson is. He's going to make a bunch of plays because that's all he's done since he's gotten to Georgia. It's that wave of, all right, what do we get out of Tresman Marshall? The young defensive linemen, Tyrion Ingram-Dawkins, Warren Brinson, Nas Stackhouse. How do those guys emerge? Is there, does Chaz Chambliss take on a larger role? Does Robert Beal, who led this team in sacks a season ago, does he become an even bigger pass rushing presence this year around with a full year as sort of the guy and the starter in that Georgia defense there? The one question that I have, it's what happens in that secondary? Who is that other cornerback opposite Keely Ringo? Who is in that safety position? Who is in that star position? Is it, what is William Poole doing and where is he playing? I think that's going to answer a lot of questions in terms of the star power in this, because I know a lot of people like Dalen Everett. They like Malachi Starks. To be interested to see what they get out of Singletary, Ja'Cory Thomas there as well. I just think it's going to be hard for those guys to come in and be really good players right away. Even Keely Ringo a year ago, his second year in a college program, there were some struggles with him during the course of the season early on there. It's not like he walked in and was the guy who returned the pick 6 against Bryce Young in the national championship game. So there's going to be growing pains with this defense. But as you point out, I think by the end of the year, we're going to know what this Georgia defense is. It might not have the same ceiling as it did a year ago, but it's still going to be better than 95, 98% of the defenses in college football.
I don't want to give away everything I'm going to do the rest of the week, but you do mention a name that I think is worth consideration, and that's Robert Beal, in that I just don't think people realize. I don't mind telling you, Connor, I didn't fully realize what kind of stat line he was putting together until the season's done. You're like, oh my gosh, 6.5 sacks, led the team a year ago, but more interesting than that, in the history of Kirby Smart at Georgia, which dates back now to 2016, there have only been 2 individual players to have a better sack year than what Beal had a season ago. Now, this was this luck, and he just sort of fluked his way into a half dozen sacks? Seems hard to imagine that's the full explanation for this. But what if this is at face value what it appears to be? A guy who was your sack leader returning for another season at Georgia. I mean, say that out loud. That sounds like a pretty good thing. And, Beal himself, if you want to go back 100 years ago to when he was a recruit, I mean, he had a pretty high profile as a recruit back then. The fact that it's now been a long time doesn't change the kind of athletic credentials he was once thought to have. I mean, what if this is just as simple as it looks? A big recruit who took a while to pop, finally did, and came back for one more season. I'm not quite so sure that in the conversation that we have about emerging stars for Georgia that we should fully look at newcomers. Maybe there's an old man here who's been kind of hinting at the idea that, yeah, I'm still pretty good too, for whatever reason, I didn't show it for a long time, but I did show it last year, and now Georgia's lucky to have me coming back this upcoming year. I think that Beal is incredibly compelling as a storyline for Georgia this season. That could go the other way, but the possibility of what it could be for the positive, I think that's pretty intriguing.
Yeah, and you look at when those sacks came a season ago, it's not like he was, racking them up against cupcakes there. Once he was sort of moved into a more starting role, so to speak, once Adam Anderson was suspended for the team, he had 5 of those sacks in the last 6 games of the year. The only game he didn't get a sack in was the SEC championship game, had sacks in both college football playoff games, had sacks in the win over Tennessee. And so, he might just very clearly be a guy that needed the opportunity to get on the playing field and had the chance to show, hey, I can be a very productive player in this defense. I might not necessarily do all the things that some of those other guys do, but if you ask me to do this one thing, I can do that pretty well. And I think Beal has shown that, whereas Nolan Smith, on the other hand, is more of the versatile. He's going to be the guy that drops back into coverage. He's the guy who can consistently set the edge out there. Beal's one trick is a really good one and a really important one. If this is a Georgia team, I know you talk 42 points is the margin you want to see the offense get to. I think 40 sacks is going to be where this Georgia defense probably needs to end up once again this coming season. And that's one of the bigger questions is where are all those sacks going to come from? And if you get to 40, Beal might need to have 8, maybe even as high as 10, given you just don't think they're going to get that same production from those inside linebackers that they got a season ago with Nakobe Dean, who had 6, Channing Tindall, and Quay Walker there as well. So if Georgia's going to get to the sack numbers, the pass rushing production they saw a year ago, they're probably going to need an even bigger year out of Robert Beal there at that outside linebacker position.
I want to talk to you about some transfer stuff before we say goodbye to you here. Before that, though, let me remind folks, this is our Kroger Fresh Take with Connor Riley here today. And, of course, Kroger's taking care of you right now for something that really matters, a chance to save more money at the pump. Well, Kroger's got that for you with their new membership program called Kroger Boost. Now, that's not the only thing you get, but you do get twice those fuel points when you're saving in store, which is good news. But you can also get free grocery delivery there as well, and all kinds of special offers throughout the year there, too. So enrollment is as little as $59 a year, which is a great opportunity for some great savings. So if you want to sign up, and I think you should, go to Kroger.com/boost. That's Kroger.com/boost. Take advantage of double the fuel points. Take advantage of the free opportunity for grocery delivery and so many other great things there as well. Kroger.com/boost. All right, Connor, let's finish with this. I think you're really good at something I'm not very good at, which is paying attention to small details. So I want to get kind of granular for a moment on the transfer issue for Georgia, starting with this. When the May 1st deadline came and went for players to enter the transfer portal and be immediately eligible for the upcoming season, they don't have to transfer by them. They just have to declare their intent to transfer going into the portal. I think some people were a little bit surprised that, Georgia just lost the one additional player in Cameron Kenny there. Some people maybe thought that Georgia was in line to lose more than that. So thinking about that, I guess, the presence of some extra scholarships because of the pandemic, does Georgia have room to take a transfer portal if it wants to take a portal player?
So the important thing to understand here is Georgia does not keep a public record of their 85-man scholarship count. So a lot of this math that we were doing to get to the 85 is unofficial. It is, some guesswork, some guys who might be on scholarship, might not be on scholarship. From what we know, which is the super seniors being back this year and some of the recruits that are coming in, my math leads me to believe that if certain things are the way that I believe that they are, Georgia is in the position to add one player, maybe 2, but I have questions about if it is going to be a second player. And having said that, I think Kirby Smart has made it clear that if the right player comes available in the transfer portal, whether it be, a guy that is already in the portal or a graduate transfer, because graduate transfers do not abide by the same rules as an underclassman using the one-time exempt transfer policy. I do think that they would take a player specifically at that safety position, I think first, and that wide receiver position there second, because the safety position, I think, as I've said before on this program, is my biggest concern coming out of spring practice there, which is the questions that they have there. Wide receiver, to me, it is all health related. And if you tell me you get a healthy seasons out of Dominic Blaylock, Arian Smith, Marcus Rosemy, Jack St. Kyrus Jackson, I think Georgia's going to be okay at the wide receiver position. So I do believe they can add at least one transfer player. A second one, the math gets a little fuzzier / uncertain in my book. And so that is sort of where it comes into question.
Okay, so yeah, two separate issues. You addressed the first, that mathematically it seems like, without getting all the details, it seems like Georgia may have room for one, possibly two. And then it becomes the issue of, well, who is that guy? Because there had been rumors about Isaiah Land, the edge rusher out of Florida A&M, who made a little bit of ruckus on social media about Georgia and a few other big-name programs. But then almost as quickly as he entered the portal, he went back to FAMU, which would lead you to believe that maybe he didn't quite get the offer he was hoping to get from one of those big-time schools. There had been a little bit of rumor lately about Georgia and a wide receiver. That seems to have kind of totally fizzled out. I haven't heard anything about that in a while. It doesn't seem like there's anything coming from that. So you are left to wonder, okay, so if Georgia is going to add a player, then, well, who is it? Because there isn't, I would say, an active rumor right now involving Georgia, but you also remind us of it doesn't necessarily have to be a portal player that we know of as of the May 1st deadline, that there is still an opportunity for it to be a grad transfer guy that maybe we haven't even had reason to consider yet. Am I saying that correctly?
Yes, I think that's the way to put it. And I'd point out here as well, this time a year ago, Eric Gilbert and Darian Kendrick were not on this Georgia roster. And I think, what you saw out of the three transfers that Georgia took last season was actually pretty illuminating there. Of the three they took, Tyke Smith, Darian Kendrick, and Eric Gilbert, who all had pretty strong backgrounds, and you would think the idea that they could come in and compete. The only one that really gave you anything at all was Darian Kendrick. Now, he was a home run and maybe perhaps even the best graduate transfer, best transfer portal addition that Georgia has had under Kirby Smart. But it's not a slam dunk that who you get out of the portal is going to be what you want or what you desire there. So, I think at this point in time, with what we know is available in the transfer portal, and I would throw out, if Jordan Addison wants to come to Georgia, I think he's the slam dunk, no doubt about it, name there. But I'm still skeptical that is maybe going to happen, just given the ties to USC. And it seems like there is a part of him that would like to stay at Pitt at least. But I think when it comes to that safety position, we'll see, does a guy from another school who's graduated transfer? Does a guy want to try and test the NCAA and see if they're going to grant a waiver from transferring after that May 1st deadline? Because that's not something that we've really seen, and we don't know what the precedent is there. And so we'll ultimately see on that. But I do think, the experience that Georgia had with the transfer portal last year is a big reason why they have not taken anybody. Whereas you look at schools like Ohio State has taken multiple transfers. Alabama has obviously taken multiple transfers this cycle. There's a reason that Georgia is, I think, being a little wary in terms of who they go out there and who they possibly target as a transfer addition.
I think you're right, and I think it's good stuff. Connor, thanks for being here for our Kroger Fresh Take today. We'll read you more at DawgNation.com and speak to you again next week. And as I said before, certainly appreciate your time.
Yep, as always, was a pleasure. Yeah.
Let's take a look around the rest of the league. This is SEC Through.
Yeah, as Connor kind of touched on at the end there, it is very interesting right now how different Georgia's building itself compared to how Alabama's building itself. And listen, there's no free lunch on either side. If you don't get really active in the transfer portal, Georgia's somewhat active. A program like Clemson hasn't been active at all. If you don't get at least somewhat active in the transfer portal, then you miss out on one of the tools in the toolbox to give talent to your roster. So if you're saying, well, listen, I'm too good for the transfer portal, well, good luck building as good a roster as you can build if you're not interested in that at all. But the flip side is, it's not an easy button to push. There is no free lunch here. The idea that, well, I'm going to go get a running back from Tech and a wide receiver from Georgia and another one from Louisville and an offensive lineman from Vanderbilt. This is not fantasy football where you just, grab a bunch of talent and you slot them into a spot on a screen. No, you actually have to play the games in real life. Football, a team sport, chemistry matters. Guys who played somewhere else a year ago who don't know their teammates very well, how quickly can they gain chemistry? Or maybe said a different way, guys who came to Alabama because of the individual glory they were promised, what happens when they bump into somebody else who got promised the same thing? As I said before, there's a little bit of intrigue about that, and certainly an interesting comparison to how programs like Georgia are putting their championship chase together compared to how a program like Alabama might be doing the same thing. We got a lot of news to give you here in a moment. Let me quickly, though, remind you that we are cruising around the SEC courtesy of Royal Caribbean. This is a great time to be on a Royal Caribbean cruise ship as we head towards the summer. Told you yesterday about those 3- and 4-night cruises that go to the Bahamas, Perfect Day, Coco Cay. In many cases, they go to Nassau. maybe you're ready for one of those 7-night cruises. I took one in February, and it was great. We also went to Nassau. We also went to Perfect Day Coco Cay. But we went to Jamaica. We were in Haiti at a great private destination called Labadee, which is right there in Haiti. Gorgeous beaches, so much fun. You've got ships going to Cozumel. You've got, down in St. Thomas, St. Martin. So many amazing ports visited by Royal Caribbean. And when you're sailing on the seas, you're also taking advantage of the great amenities that Royal Caribbean has on board. The entertainment, the dining options. Maybe for you, 3 or 4 days just isn't long enough to enjoy everything that can be enjoyed. Because I can tell you, having been there for 7 days myself, I still didn't get a chance to do everything because there is that much to do. So you've heard me talk about it. Your time is now to take advantage of it. Check out the folks at the Cruise and Vacation Authority. They'll help you get booked up here. TCAVA.com. That's the website, tcava.com. You can also give them a call, 770-952-8300. That's 770-952-8300. All right, let's roll through a bunch of news here. As Connor told you a little earlier, Dylan Raiola, 2024 quarterback, the top quarterback for the following cycle, made his commitment announcement yesterday, choosing Ohio State. This was, as the smart folks like to say, as expected. He had been, leaning the direction of Ohio State for a while. There had been a little bit of USC chatter here, but Ohio State had been the dominant factor in his recruitment for quite some time. He released a video. You see that there on your screen. He released a video, at least a shot of the video, at his local church there in Arizona, where he finally, made his announcement of Ohio State. And here's what I think is interesting here. Pretty clearly, there are just different schools that are better fits for some players than others. For instance, when a program like USC gets involved in the NIL stuff, and ironically, they don't even really have an NIL collective or anything like that. We don't really even know, the mechanism by which they're allegedly paying, Jordan Addison if he ends up going there, or Caleb Williams. But pretty clearly, LA, rich town, a lot of money, kind of a glamorous program USC's thought to be. When you hear about the emergence of a program like that under new coach Lincoln Riley, it becomes easy for some to imagine, well, I guess everybody's just going to want to go to USC. How could you turn down Hollywood? How could you turn down the glitz and glamour? How could you turn down Rodeo Drive or whatever else is just kind of a short, drive from campus there in Los Angeles? But Dylan Raiola shows you a West Coast kid going to Ohio State, a little bit more of a traditional college experience, a little bit different kind of quarterback development. Ryan Day's clearly put a lot into the NFL. There are just different schools for different players. And I think the Arch Manning recruitment's a little bit like this too. There was one thing I read from him recently where he talked about, kind of what Austin is. And he talked about kind of what Athens is. He said that he thought that Athens was the best college town he'd ever been to. And clearly kind of putting Austin in a different category. Not saying that Athens is a better college town than Austin is, but almost saying like Athens is a kind of a true college town where Austin's kind of now a much bigger city than that. If you've been to Austin, it's kind of a cosmopolitan destination. There are a lot of big companies that make their home in Austin these days. It's a little bit of a cultural center. Think about South by Southwest, the big festival that takes place there each and every year. And like for some people, the glamour of Austin, and I would say that now Austin's become kind of a glamorous town, the glamour of Austin is going to be what attracts them. It's not a traditional college town. In fact, it's gotten so big now that it almost doesn't even really feel like a college town anymore. But Athens still very much does. Some people are going to be more attracted to that. They're just different schools for different players. The Manning recruitment may be an example of that. I think the Raiola recruitment is a little bit of an example of that too. Greg Sankey was making a public appearance yesterday. There's some reporters caught up with him, including some folks from AL.com, asking Sankey about his feelings about playoff expansion. You know that at one point in time, it seemed like we were heading towards an expansion of 12 teams to the playoff expansion. To get to 12 teams, there had been a recommendation on the part of a committee working with the college football playoff folks to do that, and yet the so-called, they call it alliance or whatever it is, that's sort of teaming up against the SEC, they decided to grind the gears on this as a way of getting back to the SEC. But Sankey yesterday reiterated that folks didn't believe me when I said we were fine staying at 4, but we are. I'm paraphrasing his statement. That's essentially what he said. I think he also said that he believes the playoff expansion will be a good thing for college football, but it's clearly not a bad thing for the SEC to stay at 4. The SEC is winning the national championship more years than not, and last year in 2017 having 2 teams in the playoff that eventually played for the national championship. Pretty clearly Sankey's comfortable with that. As I've been saying in some of the interviews I've been doing lately, I think what the SEC is fine with is staying at 4. The SEC be okay with 12. What the SEC doesn't want is 8. the league believes that's just a more watered-down version of the current playoff. So that's the one non-starter for the SEC is an 8-team playoff. They like 12, they like 4, and clearly it's working out pretty well for them. I thought it was interesting to see Chris Trapasso from CBSSports.com, not among the more well-known NFL draft analysts, but a guy that's out there doing a bunch of stuff on a pretty regular basis. I guess he's the latest to get in line behind the hype train for Will Levis, the Kentucky quarterback. To me, Levis just throws too many interceptions to be, all that serious of an elite NFL draft pick. He does have a big arm. This kind of feels to me like the typical, 365 days ahead, 12 months ahead draft hype. A lot of this ends up being kind of unrequited, ends up not being, all that real. But Levis getting a lot of love right now, including Chris Trapasso, who says he could be the number 1 overall pick in next year's NFL draft, the Kentucky quarterback. We talked Kentucky yesterday, the silly stuff that Vince Marrow, one of their assistant coaches, had said about the upcoming game against Georgia. And in that same interview, Marrow went on to say that his reason for thinking that Kentucky could win the SEC East this season really rests on Will Levis, as we told you yesterday. If you're a Georgia fan, you're looking to gain more confidence in your own team for the upcoming season, just keep this in mind, that Levis, the guy that's getting all the draft hype right now, a year ago when these two teams did battle, Stetson Bennett, statistically speaking, outplayed him there that day. Now, Levis was, of course, facing the Georgia defense, which is no easy task, but I don't think that obscures the overall point that in terms of actual in-game performance, while Bennett will never be mentioned in those draft conversations, in terms of what you actually gave to your team a year ago, Stetson Bennett probably gave you more than some folks have given him credit for. The head-to-head comparison against Levis may be proof of that. By the way, bad news for Kentucky. Chris Rodriguez, the outstanding running back, was arrested recently on a host of charges, including suspicion of DUI, so a little bit of a mess for Rodriguez to deal with. We will find out what the aftermath of all this is, but Rodriguez in some legal hot water after a DUI arrest for one of the top returning players in the SEC. So a couple of procedural things here for a moment. I told you there's a lot of news today, and I just kind of want to give you the full list of this. So the NCAA Oversight Committee has recently met, and one of the reasons why folks have disliked the NCAA for such a long time is because it's like every other bureaucracy you've ever known about. There's all kinds of committees. They're always meeting. They're always making suggestions. Sometimes it's kind of hard to know what of this is real and what of this is just an excuse to go hold away in a hotel for a couple of days and eat catered meals and things like that. But the NCAA Oversight Committee is suggesting that all of college football, the Power 5 conferences, do away with divisions, basically come up with a different way to host a conference championship game, essentially waiving the current standard for how these championship games are conducted. The SEC obviously included in all of this. There's been a little bit of movement behind the scenes for the SEC to do this seemingly, and Big Ten, other leagues may get involved in this there as well. It basically opened the door for the top 2 teams by record to play for the championship, and in the case of the SEC, it also opened the door for more league teams to play each other more frequently. Now, I'm a little bit of an outlier on this in that I think the SEC has actually done a pretty good job of creating distinctive identities for its 2 divisions, the East and the West. It kind of reminds me of, I mentioned baseball earlier. When I was a kid, I felt like the American League meant something. I felt like the National League meant something. And seeing those 2 leagues play in the World Series or in the All-Star game kind of felt like it meant something. Over the course of time, that's been watered down. That's no longer true because of interleague play and everything else. Now the 2 leagues even have the same rules. Designated hitter in the National League, for instance. But to me, the East and the West have kind of always meant something. Like the East was dominant in the 90s. The West has been dominant more recently. But there's a little bit of an identity for the East, a little bit of an identity for the West. But as you add more teams into the SEC, that notion gets watered down a bit too. What the SEC has had was special. Now it's going to try to create something new where instead of playing the same teams each and every year, like, say, Tennessee for Georgia and developing a rivalry with them, and now you're going to tour the SEC more frequently, which I think folks seem to think is better for fans. We'll find out if that actually ends up being the case, but that seems to be the belief right now. A couple other stories to get to here for you a moment. It seems pretty obvious there are some battle lines being drawn when it comes to NIL. There was an interesting story in The Athletic where, boy, The Athletic loves quoting these, lawyers and collective folks. They are really in business with them in terms of putting their point of view out into the forefront. And a story yesterday, kind of that, quoting a couple of different, lawyer type folks, collective type folks who are kind of deeply connected on the NIL side, essentially laughing at the idea that the NCAA is going to be able to do anything to make the NIL scene less chaotic. That's a word that a lot of folks are using right now to describe how the NIL stuff is kind of playing out with the Jordan Addison transfer rumor that he going to enter the portal, go to USC. Some folks have felt like that was tampering. What's gone on with Miami basketball, John Ruiz, their high-profile booster, and the way in which he's kind of openly boasted about using an NIL deal to secure a transfer from Kansas State. And then there was the other thing that happened where the other player, like, essentially was going to hold out because he wasn't happy with his NIL deal, and you had Booster battling agent over all of this. That just seems really gross to a lot of people, and the NCAA is going to try to fix this. And the NIL folks, the attorneys connected to some players, they are, including guys who've been quoted in stories in the past, they are saying that if you do this, we are going to sue. You may be getting to the point where some of the folks connected to the NCAA, based on some recent guidelines that were dropped yesterday and things like that, are saying, well, we may just have to battle you in court because we feel like we're facing an existential crisis here in terms of the survival of the sports that we've all known and loved and cared about. I did think it was interesting that Kevin Warren, who's the Big Ten commissioner, who I don't think is a strong leader, but Warren was quoted by Dennis Dodd, CBS Sports, yesterday as essentially predicting that eventually this is going to change, that the craziness that has defined the last couple of months, Warren essentially predicted that eventually that's going to go away and things are going to get back to what I would call normal. He says that. Other folks on the NIL side say, good luck with that. We're going to sue. It would appear that we're heading for a pretty big showdown here. And I'm not smart enough to tell you who's going to win, but I know who I'm rooting for. And then finally, there's this. Jerry Bohannon was quarterback at Baylor, transferred. There had been some thought that he might be going to Missouri, but instead he chooses South Florida, which is a little bit weird, I guess. But I guess I'm kind of left to wonder, given the fact that Missouri was also a little bit in pursuit of JT Daniels for a moment, like how hard did Missouri really work for a transfer quarterback? Because if they worked hard and got beat out for JT and then got beat out for Bohannon there as well, maybe that says something. Or if you take Eli Drinkwitz at his word that after spring practice that they liked a couple of young quarterbacks they had, maybe that says something there as well. But it was interesting that Bohannon had kind of been on Missouri's radar a bit, but ultimately made what I think most people would say is a pretty unorthodox choice to go to South Florida instead of Missouri. But nonetheless, that's the case. Although I guess, is it Jeff Scott, the former Clemson offensive coordinator that's head coach there at South Florida? So you're at least teaming with a good offensive mind down there. But I thought that was a pretty interesting story of Missouri either missing out on another transfer quarterback or maybe deciding they didn't really need one. Hard to know what exactly happened there, but interesting nonetheless. We'll make that cruiser on the SEC, courtesy of Royal Caribbean. And we're going to see if we can get ready to bring this marathon show to a close here in a moment. But before we do, there are a couple of cool things involving former Georgia running backs, the great tandem that once played together at UGA that I want to make sure you're aware of. If you're watching a video, you'll see this. So Nick Chubb is famous for his feats of strength in the weight room. Maybe the latest example of this, the NFL shared this. This is a phenomenal squatting performance. It looks like he's like squatting like racing tires here. This is just amazing. Is that 650? How much is that? Is 615 pounds. So squatting 615 pounds here. Just remarkable. I mean, Chubb is just a workout warrior, always has been, and his dedication to all that is one of the things that's made him so successful. I mean, I can't even imagine lifting that much weight, what it'd do to my back to even try to lift half that. That's really pretty remarkable. And the looks on the faces of the young players in the locker room there at Cedartown as he does this are all the more enjoyable on this. Great to see from Nick Chubb. And then his former partner at UGA, Sony Michel's got a new NFL home. Sources reporting, Ian Rappaport and others, that Michel going to sign with his hometown team, the Miami Dolphins. A lot of you are aware that Michel played his high school ball there at American Heritage in Plantation, Florida, and returning to South Florida to play for the Miami Dolphins. So congratulations to Sony Michel for finding a new home there in the NFL. Happy to see he and Nick Chubb both doing so well. That is a really good thing to be able to see. So we're really happy about that. And with that said, we will get ready to wrap up the show for today. couple of golden shoes for you here. We've been kind of honoring mothers lately as a part of Mother's Day. We've done some golden shoe submissions related to this. This is Heather Leo. Heather is a former golden shoe winner. She's also the mother of our own Jack Leo, who you see him covering the Diamond Dogs and some stuff we're seeing around DawgNation. To us of our mom, grandmom, with her favorite Mother's Day present. Proud alumna of the fairest of the Southland. Great Georgia flag there, national champions flag. Of all the Georgia national championship gear, the flag is almost one of my favorite things there. What a great photo. Great family celebration on Mother's Day. Let me tell you, a woman after my own heart is one that wants some national championship UGA gear as a part of Mother's Day. That's great stuff by Heather Leo. I appreciate her sharing that. By the way, some of y'all told me about this. This is really funny. So Dabo Swinney was at the Braves game apparently on Saturday. Everything Georgia letting us know on Twitter that he was booed loudly by the Georgia fans on hand when he was shown. You love to see that. A lot of these, programs around the South are going to try to creep in on Braves country and try to co-opt that Braves stuff for themselves, but we know they don't live in the Braves state. Now, the Braves country does spread all across the South, but still, the connection that Georgia has to the Braves, much deeper, much more substantial. So good for Braves fans for booing Dabo on Saturday night. We'll give them a golden shoe for that. We'll also remind you, Gator Hater Updater, it's been 4,870 days since Florida has won a national championship, and our Gator Hater Countdown, 172 days, Georgia back in Jacksonville, beating up on Florida again. That is our Gator Hater Countdown. This is DawgNation Daily, presented by Engineered Solutions of Georgia, and we will see you tomorrow. And on video. It is early May, and we're doing 17-hour shows, so there you go. But nonetheless, hope you had a good time with it, and we'll take your comments now on Facebook and YouTube and at DawgNation.com. And just to prevent Jay Shipes from saying it's been 8 million days since I've started on YouTube, I'm going to start on YouTube for 2 consecutive days, and then after that, hopefully I get no grief from the likes of Jay Shipes on this anymore. Thomas Payne says, "Is that orange? Is it a Braves hat?" So one of the things the Braves do, and listen, as I said before, they got a lot of fans all across the South, so this is probably good business for them. But they do make the co-branded hats. Now, I've got like a co-branded T-shirt that's got the Braves A and the Georgia G, came from the Braves. So they have some officially sanctioned co-branded gear, but they also do those for a number of programs around the South. So there is a chance that Dabo has a Clemson-themed Braves hat, because the Braves, for the most part, make all of those for all those schools there around the South. I remember being in Sanford Stadium in 91 when the Braves won the division for the first time, at least during that great run in the 90s. This is back when the Braves were still in the National League West. And I remember Georgia also beat Clemson that night. Big upset, top 10 team that came into Athens. But you had both fan bases doing the chop before the game. So Clemson fans in the upstate there, they are legitimately Braves fans for the most part. So, I guess you'll make common cause with them for baseball, but you still like the idea of Dabo getting booed at the football game. Let's see what else. Some folks having trouble with some Bama fans in the comment section right now. Joseph White says Branson Robinson was squatting 630 pounds as a senior in high school. I'm not surprised to hear that that he's putting together feats of strength too. I mean, obviously you can tell by looking at him that he's no stranger to the weight room for sure. For sure. Bill Shirley said it was 675, not 615. Thank you very much, Bill. Appreciate that. Still seems like a lot. Wow, is that a lot? Phone name unit says Dabo Swinney's Georgia's next offensive coordinator. Ironically, I don't think that Dabo is qualified to be Georgia's offensive coordinator. He's clearly working pretty well as Clemson's head coach, but if he tried to put himself on the coordinator market, I'm not really quite so sure who would take a flyer on that. I mean, this was a guy who was wide receivers coach before becoming head coach, and he's won 2 national championships, so there's no problem with him as a head coach. But as a coordinator, I'm not quite so sure he's qualified. Green Soldier asks a good question. Which player makes the biggest freshman to sophomore jump? Is it Brock? Is it A.D. Mitchell? A.D. Mitchell may be your best name there simply because while I expect Brock Bowers to get incrementally better, to have a huge jump given how good he was a year ago, that would almost be, improbable to be that much better in year 2 compared to year 1. But I think that A.D. Mitchell is probably a pretty good name. Connor Raleigh, yes, sir.
I mean, doesn't the answer have to be JDJ?
Yeah, maybe so, because he's going to be in the field a lot more. That's actually a pretty good name to consider there on that. Green Soldier also mentions Ladd McConkey as being a good one. Yeah, I mean, the thing about Ladd is his third year. That's right. We're going into his third year for sure. I think that's part of my issue on stuff like this is somewhere around the pandemic, I became completely incapable of remembering who was in what signing class, what in high school you call them grades. What grade, year class folks are in. My ability to keep track of that, probably never perfect, but somewhere around the pandemic, it just became completely impossible for me to keep up with all that. Jay Shipe says, no way Brock takes a jump. Too many reps to split. I think he meant Brock. You mean Brock Bowers or Brock Vandegrift? In the case of Brock Bowers, I expect him to be better in this upcoming year than he was a year ago. He was great last year, but I think it's reasonable to think he could be even better this year. Jonathan Aaron giving these Bama fans some grief. So good to see the folks over here on YouTube having a good time. Let me go to Facebook for a moment. On Facebook. Hope everybody's doing great. Always takes a little longer to load on Facebook for whatever reason. I think it's probably the reason that people gravitate towards YouTube as much as they do. Gary Holt says it's just a matter of time before teams can figure out enough money to get kids to come as a walk-on. So I think it's an interesting point. I've actually been kind of thinking about this. Let me see if I can sort of do this succinctly. I really do believe there is more to college football decisions, even in the current and chaotic era we live in with NIL. There is clearly more going on here than money. As I mentioned before, think about a guy like Dylan Raiola, who kind of chooses Ohio State over USC. That seems to be about just a preference of where you want to go to school, you want to be taught by. There's NIL probably to be had on both sides, but clearly there's more that goes into that decision than just that. Plus, people say, well, what's going to happen when somebody just says, hey, we'll have 1 million players in scholarship because we're just going to use NIL money to pay their way through college. Over the course of 4 years, do you know how expensive that is? I mean, that would be really, really expensive. I mean, some of you know how expensive this is because you pay your own way for your own children to go through college. And I do realize, I guess, that BYU has some version of this going on, but for the most part, that's going to be really hard for a lot of people to do. I mean, part of the issue is that college is so expensive. But beyond that, let me see if I can say this in kind of a clear and concise way. A lot of people say that the NIL stuff is just a legal version of the kind of under-the-table payments that have been going on in college football for a long time. And I'm not willing to stipulate that necessarily, but let's just say for the sake of conversation, that is true. For the sake of conversation, let's just say that under-the-table payments, what we would think of as an NCAA violation, quietly ignored behind the scenes, let's say that's been the dominant feature of college football for a long time. If that is true, isn't it interesting how much the landscape of college football has changed over the course of that time? Take the SEC here for a moment. In the 90s, this league was dominated by Florida and Tennessee. The cynical person would have said, and maybe they're right, just for the sake of conversation, we're going to assume they're right, but I'm not willing to necessarily stipulate that they are. But maybe they're right when they say, well, the reason why Tennessee and Florida was dominant in the 90s is because they were paying everybody. Well, now if you look at the current SEC, it's a league dominated by Georgia and Alabama. And some cynical person may say, well, that's because they're paying players under the table. Well, I don't have any proof of that necessarily, but let's just say for the sake of conversation they are. Well, isn't it interesting that even with money kind of being a factor under the table, some would suggest that the dominant teams still change. It's these teams now. It was these other teams in the 90s. Go back before that nationally. Think about Nebraska had their moment in the sun. Miami had its moment in the sun. Oklahoma throughout different periods of time has been good, then not good again. That clearly there's more going on here than just money. If if you take the most cynical, hard-hearted person in the world who thinks that college football's always been about, money being paid to somebody under the table, if you take that person seriously, if you take that person at their word, isn't it still interesting that over the course of 50 years, the best teams didn't just stay the same? In other words, this is clearly not a sport that's only defined by who can pay the most money, because over the course of that same span, the best teams are always changing. It's this handful of teams in one decade, it's a different handful of teams in the next decade, and a different handful of teams in the next decade, and there just seems to be a good bit of change over there. So I actually take some comfort in the notion of, well, if it really is true that money's always been a factor here, that money alone hasn't been enough to maintain excellence, to maintain dominance, because the teams at the top, told as a story over years, that's always changing. So do with that what you will. Let's see what else. Keith Fold says the 90s was a frustrating time for Georgia. No doubt about that. Gerald Harmon says, let my boy Rush Probst chime in on this. I'm sure he's got plenty to say, although later on he may deny having said any of it. Alan Hampton says Darnell Washington's going to show out this year. With Gilbert and Bowers and Washington all pushing each other, these tight ends are going to be even more special. Yeah, we've had our buddy Mark Morris, one of our great commenters the other day, mentioning that he thought it might end up being the best tight end room in the history of college football, and maybe it will. Maybe it will. Let's see what else. Jamie Huff mentioning Nyland Green as a next step taker. I do think it was really interesting that Nyland actually had a little bit of buzz around him last summer, I remember. And then during the season, it kind of faded a bit. Now, I don't know if that was just because that's what chatter does or if there was something to that. Yeah, but Nyland is a guy that I'm still really interested in, Jamie. Good answer. That's a very good name for that. Brian Whitehead says, aren't we halfway between the national championship and the beginning of the football season? Apparently we are. Now, I'm not very good at this kind of thing, but because I thought we actually already got to the halfway point, but I guess now we are truly at that. I think yesterday may have been exactly halfway. So, yeah, there you go. There you go. I believe that is indeed the case. Keith Fold says that Brock Bowers may be invited to New York before he leaves UGA, and he might very well win it. Yeah, I take it as a very real possibility that eventually Bowers could be a Heisman finalist as a tight end. At one point in time would have seemed, too unorthodox to be true, but we've seen wide receiver win the award. We saw a defensive player as a finalist a year ago. Clearly, Jordan Davis got plenty of buzz in that regard throughout the season. We probably helped contribute to some of that. But we have a little bit more room for unorthodox Heisman contenders than we've had in the past. Raymond Brandon says, do you think we'll see more game time reps for second and third string quarterbacks? Maybe so. Maybe so. Always the possibility. But I think that, look, I don't think it's very realistic to think you'd play three quarterbacks frequently. You can play a second quarterback and get him a good number of reps. But the idea that you're going to play three quarterbacks frequently, that's probably more than can be done. Bob Fiquet on the subject of the Georgia offensive line being road graders for the running backs. Yeah, I know, what's his name, Jim Nagy from the Senior Bowl recently had some interesting stuff to say about Kenny McIntosh. We'll probably touch on that at some point in time before the week is done. But, I've said now a few times that I think it could be a much bigger year for the Georgia running game, and improved offensive line could be a big reason for that. So I kind of agree with Bob there. Let me go to DawgNation.com and get some comments there. Cam Hasty says that Beal was the sack leader for the Dogs after not starting until after the Florida game. Yeah, I think that I think it's a pretty amazing story, and it's a suggestion of what could be on the way. Astro UGA says, does Georgia need Arch? Listen, I think the presence of, basically meaning that Georgia's already deep at quarterback, I think the presence of more good players is never a bad thing. Like, I don't know that Arch Manning's going to be a great player, but I also don't know that Carson Beck, Brock Vandegrift, nor Gunnar Stockton is going to be a great player. I think the more very talented players you put into a competition, the better chance you have of identifying somebody who can truly be great for you. The thing about five-star quarterbacks is they have about a 50-50 chance of being what they're supposed to be. So if you take enough coin flips and you flip them enough times, and we're actually going to talk about this related to the defensive secondary before the week is done too, but if you flip that coin enough times, you're going to get the answer you're looking for eventually. And so between Brock, who was a 5-star, Gunner, who at one point was a 5-star, Arch, if he comes here, who is a 5-star, Carson Beck, who's a 4-star, but obviously plenty of admirers. Between all those guys, if you give them all a chance, that's 4 pretty big quarterbacks, 4 pretty big quarterbacking prospects if Manning were to come to Georgia. You give them all a chance, the notion that one of them really pops and becomes a great quarterback, I would say that's statistically likely. Now, any individual name, would I be willing to stake my, life on him being a great quarterback? Not on any individual quarterback. And that's true for the guys at Georgia or for Dylan Raiola or for, the quarterbacks in next year's draft. I'm just not placing that big of a bet on any one individual player. I take comfort in numbers. I've always said it. Numbers are more important to me than names. Give me a big number of elite prospects, and hopefully 1 or 2 of them really become that guy, more so than hitching my wagon to an individual name, because even the guys who do this for a living, NFL GMs, they have to pick one player for one draft spot. Even they only get it right about 50% of the time. Everybody else is likely to get less right than that. So individual projections, I think, are certainly ripe for folly. But a population of big-time players and hoping that somebody emerges from that, that's just a much safer opportunity. James Lawson says, I think the NIL deals are going to have to warrant some kind of contract to prohibit endless transfers. It's one of the things that Nick Saban's kind of talked about. I don't think that Saban's necessarily wrong on this, that it's really the potent combination of NIL stuff and then transfer stuff that leads to the chaos. I really don't know that many people who have a problem with players getting paid. I really don't know that. I mean, I think people like the idea of taking care of football players. Those of who like football players, and taking care of players, I think makes some sense. But the way in which that we're currently conducting business, I just think is problematic for the sport. Because ultimately, here's what I believe. This is not really so much about money as it seems. Clearly, the players getting money is the thing we talk about. But what this really is about power. Like, who are we deputizing to have power in college athletics? Previously speaking, the stakeholders to college athletics have been the players, the coaches, and the administrators. That's the stakeholders in college athletics. And you can say, well, the players don't have as much power as the coaches do. They don't have as much power as the administrators do. They're also young. They're also teenagers. The idea that they would have equitable power to adults, that doesn't make much sense to me. Of course they have less power over the future of the sport than the people who've been in it for decades and plan to stick around in it for decades. Of course that'd be the case. But what we have lately is like this new group of people who've been kind of deputized into power. All of a sudden, a place like Miami, think about the Miami basketball situation for a moment. A guy comes from Kansas State, 6-figure NIL deal according to the booster who was paying it. Like, who really runs Miami basketball? Does Jim Larrañaga run Miami basketball? Does Dan Redikovich, the athletic director, run Miami basketball? I mean, in the stuff that we've heard lately, it's been agent for one of the players speaking publicly, at least allegedly. It's been booster connected to the school speaking publicly. Like, have we heard from the Miami basketball coach Jim Larrañaga on any of the stuff that has erupted around Miami basketball in the NIL craze the last couple of weeks? We haven't heard one word from him, I don't think. I don't know that Dan Redikovich has spoken publicly about this either. That's the athletic director. Like, all of a sudden now, I've told you before that whoever signs your paychecks is your boss. If you pay the employees, you own the company. And it certainly seems like John Ruiz owns Miami basketball, owns Miami athletics to a certain extent. Like, he is as powerful right now at Miami as the coach, as the athletic director, as the key decision makers within the athletic department and within the university. Is that a good thing? Do we know who John Ruiz is? Have we vetted him the way we vet coaches and administrators? The same thing for the NIL agents, these forsaken attorneys who are willing to, do whatever interview, they can get their hands on. They give salacious quotes, and they just bask in the attention that the media is willing to give them here. Have we vetted these attorneys who seem willing to basically strip college athletics for parts if it brings them more money, more power? That to me is the dangerous part about this. The dangerous part of NIL is not paying the players. The dangerous part about NIL is creating this new class of stakeholder within the sport, the kind of NIL agent booster type figure. It's the power that we're giving to this new category of person within college athletics that I think is so dangerous here. Now, not everybody's bad. I love, for instance, what the folks around Georgia are doing. I think that the Classic City Collective, those people are very, very sharp guys and gals. They seem to be doing, things the right way. We've, done some stuff like, say, the Players Lounge, for instance. These seem to be really good people. A lot of them are obviously former Georgia players. They have a real heart for helping college athletes, and thus far, I think they're doing a good job of that. So not everybody connected to NIL is unscrupulous, but boy, oh boy, there are a few folks that I don't know that we fully vetted in all of this, and that's probably a bigger soapbox that I need to get on, but nonetheless. All right, we've got to get ready to go. Let's see what else. James Lawson also says, when I'm college football commissioner, NIL deals are great, but you're there for 4 years. If you want to go to the draft, early transfer, you can, but you can't be paid. Yeah, I think that's what some people are kind of hopeful for, is that the NIL becomes a little bit more of a payment for established player. However you write the law, however you write the rule, I think that's what a lot of folks are kind of hoping for. But there are also some folks out there who say, well, if you do that, you're going to open yourself up to, antitrust lawsuits and things like that. I'm not smart enough to know who's right. I'm really not. But I do know this, that college football and college athletics somehow found a way to exist for a century, and all of a sudden now it's impossible. Part of that just seems a little too weird. Suddenly this notion that you can't find some way for college athletics to exist with an idea of amateurism while also making some concessions for the players that play these sports. It feels like there ought to be a way to do this, and the kind of like the fatalistic type language that some of the lawyers connected to this seem to be using. Surely things can't be that bad. Back on YouTube and get it ready to go. So here's how you know that Arch Manning's not going to Alabama. Alabama fans in our YouTube comment section are trashing him, and if you ever needed evidence that Manning's not going to Alabama, that's all you need to know right there. What else? Anything else worth doing in YouTube? Paul Moon, the subject of the Georgia offensive line. Yeah, I think it could be really good. Jonathan Aaron says, do you think we have a shot at a dog going to New York City for this upcoming season? I guess you have an outside shot at Jalen Carter getting there because we had a defensive player there last year. I would say that Brock Bowers is your next guy on that. I would say that Stetson Bennett's got to be a part of the conversation simply because he's the quarterback on the reigning national champion. I understand why some folks think that's a little bit of a long shot, but, if he has a good season, the fact that he's such a long shot actually helps him a little bit, right? Sports writers love the story. They love telling you how much they root for the stories. Bennett, if he plays well, actually is the kind of story that could build some steam around it. So those are probably your Heisman guys. Probably Stetson, maybe Jalen Carter, maybe Brock Bowers. And as I said before, in most years, most cases, guys like Carter and guys like Bowers would have simply been too big of long shots to be actually worth consideration. But the Heisman's kind of changed in recent years. A wide receiver won the award a couple of years ago. That was a little bit of a weird thing when it first happened. Defensive player was a finalist last year. More people, I think because, the average person that votes in this award probably is a little bit more plugged in to kind of, non-traditional media type outlets. I think more people are willing to consider unorthodox Heisman candidacies in a way that might not have been true years before. What else? Anything else worth doing here? Foster Moss says, isn't it funny how Bama's whole season was hanging on 2 ACLs? Yeah, to listen to them talk, that was the case. To listen to them talk, that was the case. Frank Patterson says, how many Florida coaches has the mailman played against? I guess he was on the sideline for Jim McElwain, so this will be his third Florida coach, right? There you go. There you go. All right, a couple more. Let me see if I can find some valuable YouTube commentary. How about this from Paul Moon? Also giving you 1,000-yard season for Kendall Milton and a 1,200 all-purpose season for Kenny McIntosh. That could have been fun. Eugene Wallace also reminding us that Florida's not been to the College Football Playoff yet. That's certainly true. DSA 1 and the subject of Mercedes-Benz Stadium. It is kind of funny. That's a playoff game this year. The Peach Bowl is. Now, the other playoff games also, I think, Sugar Bowl in New Orleans, too. So, both of those venues pretty SEC friendly. But for a team like Georgia and Alabama, who probably does also really enjoy playing at Mercedes-Benz Stadium, to think you could be the number one seed, play right here in Atlanta, that'd be a pretty big deal. Now, the national championship game is at SoFi. That's way out west. But the playoff games are very SEC friendly this year, including right here in Atlanta. Anything else? Wildman Slayer says, I remember when they were also saying that Eli would be better than Peyton. I'll take Eli's 2 Super Bowls over Peyton's 2 Super Bowls, though. Peyton was pretty well along for the ride for his last. Now, maybe I shouldn't say bad things about Peyton. Arch, on the off chance that Arch is listening. But Eli's 2 Super Bowls were legit performances. The Broncos Super Bowl win for Peyton, he was along for the ride on that one. And frankly, go back and look at his performance in that Super Bowl the Colts won against the Bears. He didn't play great that day either. That was probably the best defensive team he had during his Colts era, probably there as well. So, Manning's got 2 Super Bowl rings. I don't know that it's listen, the playoff performances are never the reason to argue for Peyton Manning's greatness. Peyton Manning's an all-time great quarterback. But the playoffs don't really give you much to point to there on that. It was the clear loser in his rivalry against Tom Brady. Unfortunately, there were some come up short type moments. Eli, by comparison, seemed to save his best for the best. 2 Super Bowl wins, showing up big in both of those. I think that the Eli very much validated his career, what he did in the postseason. But that's probably a different topic for a different day. We are going to go for now. Thanks for being here for our R.S. Andrews Cool Down. Find them online, rsandrews.com, for your air conditioning, heating, plumbing, and electric needs. They show up on time. They do the work that's promised for the price that's promised. That is what R.S. Andrews can do for you. Y'all also make sure you check out our friends at the Atlanta Journal-Constitution online, ajc.com there as well. A lot going on. There's a great new spring dining guide coming out. And it's going to have some cool stuff in it, including some great stuff about some pizzas around the Atlanta area, all kinds of really fun stuff there in terms of, now you've got basically every kind of pizza that you want done well right here in Atlanta. You got Chicago-style pizza, you got the thin crust New York-style pizza, you got kind of everything else in between. And there's some really good stuff on that online. Check out ajc.com/pizza for more on that, which I think is really fun. And Hawks have actually got kind of an interesting series of preseason games coming up, heading all the way to Abu Dhabi. You can read more about that online. I think it's Abu Dhabi. You can read more about that online at ajc.com there as well. And really, really good stuff. So check it all out. ajc.com, Atlanta Journal-Constitution. Find that there. We'll see you tomorrow here on DawgNation Daily, presented by Engineered Solutions of Georgia. Hope you have a great day. We will look forward to talking to you then.